James Keeling didn't believe in weakness. But standing in the sterile corridor of St. Jude's private wing at 11 p.m., with a $50,000 watch glinting under fluorescent lights, he wondered if the nurse blocking his path might be insane. Karina Brooks pressed her finger to her lips with desperate urgency. Stay silent. In James's world, people didn't give him orders. He signed billion-dollar deals that reshaped industries and controlled boardrooms where fortunes lived and died. Yet something in the pediatric nurse's eyes, terror mixed with steel, made him freeze. What the hell is happening with my son? His voice came out deadly cold. Karina grabbed his wrist with surprising strength, pulling him toward the shadows near the observation window. If you go in there now, it'll only get worse for him. Jeffrey. His 8-year-old son was supposed to be resting after another mysterious collapse. James had spent the evening closing a merger in Singapore, the kind that required his personal attention. He'd flown back early for once, carrying guilt heavier than his titanium briefcase. From inside the VIP suite, he heard it. A child's voice, trembling, pleading, not resting, not safe. Karina's hand clamped over his mouth. She'll hear you. Trust me. 60 seconds. No one touched James Keeling. Not his executives, not his competitors, not even Thalia, his elegant wife who preferred darling to his first name. But Karina said it like a lifeline. They moved through shadows he'd never noticed in his rare visits. As they approached the observation glass, Karina positioned him behind the wall's edge. Then she pointed through the window. James saw his son kneeling on the cold hospital floor in thin pajamas, small shoulders shaking, and towering over Jeffrey, pacing in designer silk and Louboutin heels, was Thalia Keeling, his wife, the daughter of old money, the woman whose family connections had opened doors even his billions couldn't unlock. You think tears will change the diagnosis, Jeffrey? Thalia's voice sliced through the glass like surgical steel. Your father isn't here. He's never here. And when he is, he's too distracted to see what's necessary. James's vision blurred red. Weak genetics create weak children. Thalia continued, circling Jeffrey like a predator. In my family, we don't coddle failure. Be grateful I'm only teaching you resilience. She crouched to Jeffrey's eye level. Tell me what you are, Jeffrey's tiny voice whispered. A disappointment. The word detonated in James's chest. If you're listening to this and feel something tighten in your throat, take a moment to subscribe so I can keep bringing you stories that keep you on the edge of your seats every single day. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I treasure every connection across every corner of the world. Let's get back to the story. James lunged forward. Every instinct that built his empire surged through his veins like molten fury. He would destroy her with his bare hands. But Karina stopped him with a strength impossible for someone half his size, pressing him against the wall with her entire body. Not yet, she whispered, her voice cutting through his rage. If you go in there now, she'll twist everything. You'll become the villain. She'll threaten to leave and take the Aldridge family alliance with her. You know this game. James knew. The marriage to Thalia was never about love. It was a merger written in prenuptial contracts and social capital. But his son, his own flesh and blood, was kneeling on that floor, calling himself a disappointment. Karina pulled a phone from her scrub's pocket, screen glowing in the darkness. You need to see this before you do anything. She pressed play. The video flickered to life, time-stamped 9:47 p.m., less than 2 hours ago, while James had been somewhere over the Atlantic reviewing acquisition documents. The camera angle captured Jeffrey's private suite from above, medical equipment casting long shadows across sterile white walls. Jeffrey sat on the edge of his hospital bed, legs dangling, too short to reach the floor. His small hand reached toward the bedside table where a plastic water pitcher sat, condensation beating on its surface. Before his fingers could touch it, Thalia's manicured hand swept it away. Please, Mom. Jeffrey's voice cracked with thirst. Just a little water. My throat hurts. Thalia set the pitcher on the far counter, deliberately, precisely, like placing a chess piece. She turned back to Jeffrey with the same cool expression she wore at charity galas. Your throat hurts because you're weak. Do you know what the doctors told me today? They said your immune system is compromised. Do you know what that means? Jeffrey shook his head, eyes wide and glassy with fever. It means your body can't fight properly. It means you inherited your father's obsessive work ethic but none of his strength. Thalia circled the bed slowly, her silk robe whispering against the linoleum. Do you know how much this hospital suite costs per night? $45,000. For one night. And you've been here for what? 11 nights now? I'm sorry. The words tumbled out of Jeffrey in a desperate rush. I'll get better. I promise I'll. $500,000, Jeffrey. That's what you've cost us this month alone. Thalia stopped at the window, gazing out at the Chicago skyline glittering in the distance. Your father works 18-hour days to provide this life. And you? You can't even keep food down. Jeffrey's chin trembled. Can I please have water? Just, no. The word dropped like a guillotine blade. You can wait. You need to learn that resources aren't infinite, even for us. You need to understand discipline. On the phone screen, Jeffrey slid off the bed, his legs wobbling. He took 3 unsteady steps toward the pitcher before his knees buckled. He caught himself on the counter's edge, fingers gripping the metal rim until his knuckles went white. Thalia watched him struggle with the detached interest of someone observing a laboratory specimen. She didn't move to help. She didn't call for a nurse. She simply stood there, arms crossed, waiting. Jeffrey finally reached the pitcher with shaking hands. He managed to lift it, tipping it toward his mouth. Thalia plucked it from his grip effortlessly. Did I say you could have it? Her voice remained eerily calm, almost pleasant. I said wait. That means you wait. Do you understand the concept of obedience, Jeffrey? Or did your father's coddling rob you of that too? Jeffrey's face crumpled. Not with anger. Children of 8 still believe their parents are infallible gods, but with confusion. With the terrible realization that the rules kept changing, and he couldn't understand why. Get back in bed. Thalia pointed with one perfectly manicured finger. When you can demonstrate self-control, when you can show me you understand that everything in this world has a price, including water, then we'll discuss hydration. Jeffrey crawled back into bed, literally crawled on hands and knees because standing seemed beyond him. He pulled the thin hospital blanket up to his chin and turned his face toward the wall. Thalia poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher. She drank it slowly, deliberately, in full view of her son's trembling back. Then she set the glass down on the bedside table 6 inches from Jeffrey's pillow and walked out. The video ended. James Keeling, who had negotiated with sovereign wealth funds and stared down corporate raiders without flinching, found himself unable to breathe. Karina's voice cut through the roaring in his ears. That was Monday night. Would you like to see Tuesday? James didn't answer. He couldn't. The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel, and Karina took his silence as permission. She swiped to the next video, but James caught her wrist. Not yet. His voice came out raw, stripped of the commanding baritone that had built empires. Tell me who you really are. Karina met his eyes without flinching. I'm the nurse who requested the night shift in this wing 3 months ago. I'm the woman who installed micro-cameras in the air vents, the light fixtures, and behind the medical monitor. And I'm the person who's been documenting everything because I knew eventually you'd come home early. She pulled her arm free and walked to the observation window, gesturing for James to follow. Through the glass, Thalia had returned to Jeffrey's room, settling into the leather chair beside his bed with her phone, scrolling through messages with practiced disinterest. Look at the IV stand, Karina whispered, pointing to the metal pole beside Jeffrey's bed. Second bag from the top. See the label? James squinted. Standard saline solution? Prescription noted. Attending physician's signature visible even from this distance. Now look at this. Karina pulled a small notebook from her pocket, the kind with a worn leather cover that suggested constant use. She flipped it open to a page dense with handwriting, dates, and timestamps. May 15th, 2:34 a.m. Thalia enters Jeffrey's room, removes standard saline bag, replaces it with an identical bag from her Louis Vuitton tote. Jeffrey's heart rate increases within 20 minutes. Attending physician notes unexplained tachycardia in morning rounds. She turned the page. May 22nd, 3:18 a.m. Same pattern. This time Jeffrey develops tremors. Diagnosis: anxiety disorder. Prescription: benzodiazepines, which Thalia personally administers. James grabbed the notebook, flipping through pages of meticulous documentation. Each entry followed the same devastating pattern. Thalia's late-night visits, Jeffrey's mysterious symptoms, doctors' baffled diagnoses, 3 months of evidence written in Karina's precise, damning handwriting. You're saying she's poisoning him? The words felt absurd even as they left his mouth, the kind of accusation that belonged in tabloids, not in the private wing of St. Jude's, where millionaires paid for discretion and excellence. Not poisoning, medicating. Karina took the notebook back, handling it like sacred text. Small doses of medications that create symptoms but nothing immediately life-threatening. Enough to keep Jeffrey sick, keep him hospitalized, keep you distracted and guilty and far away from your financial operations. She walked to a locked cabinet near the nurse's station, produced a key from her lanyard, and opened it. Inside sat a plastic bag containing 4 IV bags, each tagged with dates and evidence labels. "I've been intercepting them," Karina continued, lifting one bag carefully. "Every time Thalia replaces Jeffrey's medication, I wait until she leaves. Then I switch it back with a genuine saline bag and preserve hers. I sent samples to an independent toxicology lab under a false name. The results came back 2 days ago." She pulled a folded document from the cabinet and handed it to James. His hands shook as he read the lab report technical language that gradually resolved into horrifying clarity. Digoxin. Small doses, carefully calibrated to cause rapid heartbeat, nausea, and weakness without triggering immediate cardiac arrest. "She's been giving my son heart medication?" James's voice dropped to something subterranean, volcanic. "Jeffrey doesn't have a heart condition." "No, he doesn't." Karina closed the cabinet with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. "But if he develops one, if his heart fails from chronic exposure to these doses, it would look like a tragic genetic condition. Wealthy families have a history of cardiac issues. No one would question it." Through the window, Thalia glanced at her watch, smiled at something on her phone screen, and stood. She leaned over Jeffrey's sleeping form, pressed a kiss to his forehead, a gesture of maternal tenderness that made James's stomach turn, and whispered something inaudible. Then, she reached for the IV bag. "She's doing it now," Karina said flatly. "Watch." James's hand moved to the door handle, every muscle in his body coiled to strike. But Karina's grip was iron. She pulled him back with a strength born from 3 months of waiting for this exact moment. "Not yet," she hissed. "If you stop her now, you stop one attempt. If you wait, I'll show you why she's doing this, and then you can stop all of it." Through the glass, Thalia replaced the IV bag with practiced efficiency, her movements smooth and clinical. She checked the drip rate, adjusted the tubing, and smoothed Jeffrey's hair with a tenderness that would have fooled anyone who hadn't seen the previous 2 hours of footage. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her entire demeanor shifted. The cold maternal mask melted into something else entirely. Something hungry. She typed rapidly, then smiled. The kind of smile that never appeared in family photographs. Karina pulled James further down the corridor, into a small consultation room. She closed the door and locked it, then opened her laptop on the desk. The screen glowed to life, displaying a file directory with dozens of folders, each labeled with dates. 3 months ago, I wasn't looking for medical tampering, Karina said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I was looking for an affair. She pulled up a video file dated 8 weeks prior. The footage showed the hospital's underground parking garage. Timestamp reading 1:47 a.m. A black Mercedes SUV pulled into a spot near the elevator bank. Thalia emerged from the vehicle, adjusting her dress, followed by a man James recognized immediately. Silas Thorne. The name tasted like battery acid. Your hedge fund competitor, Karina confirmed. The man who's been shorting your company's stock for the past 6 months. The same man who testified against you in the Senate hearing on tech monopolies. James watched the screen as Silas pulled Thalia against him in the shadows, kissing her with an intimacy that spoke of long familiarity, not recent passion. This wasn't a new affair. This was established ritual. Karina clicked to another file. This one showed Silas and Thalia in what appeared to be a hotel room, sitting at a small table covered with documents. The audio was muffled but audible. Within 4 months, if the dosage remains consistent, Silas was saying, pointing to a medical report. Gradual heart failure, genetic predisposition. No one will question it, especially given his hospitalizations. Thalia leaned back in her chair, swirling red wine in a crystal glass. And the inheritance structure? Jeffrey's trust dissolves upon death before age 18. Everything reverts to you as primary beneficiary, then flows through the marital estate. With James buried in SEC investigations and patent lawsuits, Silas smiled, predatory and cold. He'll be too distracted to notice the real money moving offshore. How much have we moved so far? $460 million through the Cayman accounts. Another $200 through the Singapore shell corporations. Silas pulled out a tablet, displaying spreadsheets. When Jeffrey's gone, you file for divorce, citing James's emotional absence and neglect. You walk away with 60% of the marital assets, roughly $18 billion, and I walk away with the satisfaction of watching James Keeling lose everything that matters. Thalia took a long sip of wine. And if James somehow discovers the affair before Jeffrey dies, then we accelerate the timeline. Silas reached across the table, covering her hand with his. 1 large dose instead of gradual exposure. Make it look like sudden cardiac arrest. Tragic, but clean. The video ended. James stood perfectly still, his breath coming in shallow pulls like a drowning man rationing air. The consultation room felt too small, the walls pressing inward. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals, navigated corporate warfare, outmaneuvered some of the sharpest minds in global finance. But he'd never anticipated this, his wife, his son's mother, planning murder with the precision of a quarterly earnings report. "There's more," Karina said quietly, pulling up another folder. "I found the financial records. Silas has been embezzling from your offshore accounts through a vulnerability in your accounting software. They've been bleeding you dry while keeping you focused on Jeffrey's medical crisis." She looked at James directly, her eyes holding something beyond evidence, beyond proof. She held purpose. "So tell me, Mr. Keeling, are you ready to liquidate your old life?" James didn't answer Karina's question. He couldn't. The words were lodged somewhere between his chest and his throat, tangled with rage and guilt and a grief so profound it threatened to collapse him from the inside out. Instead, he walked out of the consultation room and back toward Jeffrey's suite. This time, Karina didn't stop him. Through the observation window, Thalia was gone. The room sat empty except for Jeffrey, small and still beneath white hospital blankets, the poisoned IV dripping steadily into his arm. The machines beeped their rhythmic lies, heart rate stable, oxygen saturation normal, as if the numbers could measure the systematic destruction of a child's body. James entered the room like a ghost, his expensive shoes silent against the linoleum. He moved to Jeffrey's bedside and stood there for a long moment, watching his son's chest rise and fall, each breath a small miracle he'd taken for granted for 8 years. Jeffrey's face was pale, thinner than James remembered. When had that happened? When had the roundness of childhood melted away, replaced by the gaunt angles of chronic illness? James couldn't remember the last time he'd really looked at his son, not glanced, not nodded approvingly from across a room, but truly looked. He knelt beside the bed. The movement felt foreign. James Keeling didn't kneel. Not for investors, not for board members, not for presidents or prime ministers. But here, in this sterile room that cost $45,000 per night, he lowered himself to the floor and rested his forehead against the edge of Jeffrey's mattress. "I'm sorry." The words came out broken, barely audible above the mechanical breathing of medical equipment. "God, Jeffrey, I'm so sorry." Jeffrey stirred, his eyelids fluttering but not quite opening. His hand moved slightly across the blanket, fingers curling reflexively like he was reaching for something that was never there. James took his son's hand, feeling how small it was, how fragile. The bones felt like bird wings beneath paper-thin skin. When had Jeffrey become this delicate? When had the vibrant boy who used to race through the penthouse, laughing and crashing into furniture, turned into this whisper of a child? "I thought I was protecting you," James continued, his voice raw and stripped of every corporate polish. "I thought if I built something massive enough, powerful enough, you'd never have to struggle the way I did. You'd never have to fight for respect or security, or a place in the world. I thought money could insulate you from pain." He pressed Jeffrey's hand to his own chest, where his heart hammered like it was trying to escape. "I was wrong. I was so goddamn wrong." The words tasted like ash. "I gave you everything except the one thing that mattered. I gave you a trust fund worth hundreds of millions, but I never gave you time. I gave you the best schools, the finest tutors, access to every opportunity, but I never gave you me." Jeffrey's breathing shifted, becoming slightly more conscious. His fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around James's hand. "I missed your birthday this year," James said, the admission cutting like broken glass. "I sent a card from Tokyo with a check for $50,000. $50,000 for an 8-year-old. Like you could buy back the father who wasn't there to blow out candles with you." He lifted his head, looking at his son's sleeping face. In the dim light, Jeffrey looked even younger, vulnerable in a way that made James's chest physically ache. "I know you can't hear me right now, but I need to say this." James's voice steadied, taking on the tone of an oath. "A blood promise. I'm going to fix this. Not the money doesn't matter anymore. I'm going to fix us. I'm going to be the father I should have been from the beginning." Behind him, the door opened quietly. Karina entered, holding a fresh IV bag, genuine saline, untampered. "She's coming back," Karina whispered. "You need to leave. She can't know you were here." James stood slowly, his knees protesting from kneeling on the hard floor. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to Jeffrey's forehead, feeling the fever heat still radiating from his son's skin. "I promise," he whispered against Jeffrey's temple. "Daddy's here now, and I'm not leaving ever again." He straightened and turned to Karina. His eyes had changed, no longer the calculating gaze of a billionaire CEO, but something sharper, more dangerous. "Tell me what I need to do." James Keeling walked into his downtown office at 6:47 a.m., exactly 3 hours after leaving Jeffrey's hospital room. To anyone observing, he looked like he always did, impeccably dressed in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, leather briefcase in hand, the same determined stride that had carried him through 1,000 high-stakes negotiations. But the man inside the suit had been hollowed out and rebuilt in the span of one night. His assistant, Miranda, looked up from her desk with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Keeling, your 7:30 with the Singapore partners is confirmed. The merger documents are ready for your review, and cancel it." James didn't break stride toward his corner office. "Cancel everything for the next 72 hours. Tell them I'm dealing with a personal emergency." Miranda's fingers froze above her keyboard. In 12 years of service, James had never canceled a meeting. He'd conducted conference calls from his father's funeral. He'd closed a $3 billion acquisition from a hospital bed after a skiing accident. Personal emergencies didn't exist in James Keeling's vocabulary. Until now. He closed his office door and locked it another first. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Chicago's skyline. His empire spread out below him in steel and glass and ambition. Somewhere in that sprawl of buildings, Silas Thorne was probably sitting in his own office, believing he'd won. James opened his laptop and pulled up the encrypted communication channel he'd established with Marcus Chen, his most trusted attorney, and the only person outside of Karina who would know the truth. "Initiating Protocol Lazarus," he typed. "Total wealth liquidation. Timeline: 48 hours. Absolute discretion required." The response came within 90 seconds. "Are you certain? This is irreversible." James's fingers didn't hesitate. "Execute immediately." Within minutes, his screen filled with cascading transactions. 23 offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands emptied and transferred to a blind trust established under Jeffrey's name with Karina Brooks as trustee. Singapore shell corporations dissolved. Assets converted to bearer bonds and physically secured in a Swiss vault. Real estate holdings in Manhattan, London, and Dubai placed in sell orders with instructions to accept any reasonable offer within 48 hours. James was dismantling his empire with the same ruthless efficiency he'd used to build it. His phone buzzed a secure line. Marcus Chen's voice came through, tight with concern. "James, I need to confirm I'm reading this correctly. You're liquidating $18 billion in assets and funneling it into an untraceable trust. The IRS alone will." "Let them come," James interrupted. "By the time they finish their investigation, I'll be a different person in a different life. Jeffrey will be protected. That's all that matters. And Thalia? She'll notice when she's supposed to notice." James pulled up another screen, this one showing his trading account. "I need you to coordinate with our contacts at the SEC. In 6 hours, I'm going to make the worst trade of my career." He began typing orders into the system, deliberately catastrophic positions, shorting his own company's stock, buying worthless derivatives, placing massive bets against stable industries while investing heavily in companies on the verge of bankruptcy. To anyone watching, and Silas Thorne would definitely be watching, it would look like James Keeling was having a mental breakdown. The brilliant billionaire finally cracking under pressure, making increasingly desperate trades to recover from mounting losses. Marcus's silence stretched for a long moment. "You're going to fake financial ruin." "Not fake, real." James clicked through another series of transactions, each one bleeding millions. "By tomorrow morning, every financial analyst in the world will be writing obituaries for my career. Silas will think his plan is working ahead of schedule. Thalia will accelerate her timeline, get sloppy, make mistakes. And when she does," James's jaw tightened, "we'll be ready." He spent the next 4 hours systematically destroying his public financial profile while secretly constructing an invisible safety net for his son. Every dollar he appeared to lose was actually flowing into the blind trust, untouchable, invisible, protected by layers of legal complexity that would take years to unravel. By 11 a.m., financial news networks were running breaking alerts. Tech billionaire James Keeling loses $4.2 billion in catastrophic trading disaster. By 2 p.m., his stock had crashed by 47%. By 5 p.m., his phone was flooded with calls from concerned investors, board members, and reporters smelling blood in the water. James ignored them all. He sat in his office, watching the sunset paint Chicago's skyline in shades of copper and gold, and felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years: freedom. His phone buzzed one final time, a text from an unknown number. He opened it to find a message from Karina. She just called Silas. They're meeting tonight. I'll send you the location. James stood, straightening his tie out of habit. The old James Keeling had just died publicly, spectacularly, in full view of the global financial markets. Now it was time to see who would dance on his grave. The federal investigator looked exactly like someone who shouldn't be a federal investigator, which was probably why she was so good at it. Agent Rebecca Zhao sat across from James in an unmarked sedan, parked 3 blocks from the Four Seasons, wearing a Northwestern University sweatshirt and yoga pants, her hair pulled into a messy ponytail. She looked like a graduate student, not someone who'd spent the last 8 years dismantling white-collar crime syndicates. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Zhao said, scrolling through the evidence on Karina's laptop. "Your wife has been systematically poisoning your 8-year-old son with cardiac medication to fake a genetic condition, embezzling hundreds of millions through your offshore accounts with her lover, and planning to either divorce you or murder your child, depending on which timeline serves her better. That's the summary, yes." James kept his voice steady, though hearing it stated so plainly made his hands clench involuntarily. Zhao looked up from the screen, her expression unreadable. "And you discovered all of this last night? Early this morning, technically. And instead of confronting your wife immediately or calling the police, you spent the entire day destroying your financial reputation and liquidating $18 billion. She leaned back, studying him with unsettling intensity. "Most people in your position would have called their lawyer. You called Marcus Chen and asked him to help you disappear. Most people," Karina interjected from the back seat, "haven't watched their child being tortured for 3 months while gathering evidence that would actually hold up in court. Street justice feels satisfying. Federal charges feel permanent." Zhao's eyes shifted to Karina with newfound respect. "You're the nurse who installed the surveillance equipment." "Pediatric nurse, yes. Also former Army intelligence analyst." Karina pulled out her phone, displaying a new video file. "They're meeting in 20 minutes. Suite 2847. Silas booked it under a shell company name, but I tracked his assistant's credit card." "How did you?" Zhao started, then shook her head. "Never mind. I don't want to know what laws you broke getting this information." "Smart policy," Karina said flatly. James checked his watch. 8:43 p.m. His phone had been buzzing constantly all day. Panicked board members, gleeful competitors, Thalia herself calling 6 times with increasingly concerned messages. He'd ignored them all. The world thought James Keeling was in freefall, and that perception was exactly what he needed. Zhao pulled out her own phone, typing rapidly. "I've got a team on standby, but I need to be clear about something. If we go in there with federal agents, this becomes an official investigation. Everything goes public. Your son's medical records, your wife's affair, the embezzlement. Are you prepared for that?" James met her eyes without hesitation. "My son almost died while I was busy protecting my reputation. I don't care about public anymore. I care about permanent." "Good answer." Zhao finished typing and looked up. "My team is in position. We've got audio surveillance approved by a federal judge based on the embezzlement evidence. The moment they sign any documents related to the offshore transfers or discuss Jeffrey's medical situation with intent, we move." Karina leaned forward between the front seats. "What about Jeffrey?" "He's still in the hospital with a compromised IV line." "Already handled," Zhao said. "I've got 2 agents posing as night shift nurses. They'll maintain chain of custody on all medical equipment and ensure nothing else gets tampered with. Your son is safe." A black SUV pulled up to the Four Seasons entrance. Even from this distance, James recognized Thalia's silhouette as she stepped out, dressed in a burgundy dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She moved through the lobby with the confident grace of someone who believed she'd already won. 3 minutes later, Silas Thorne arrived in his Mercedes, parking in the underground garage, and entering through the side entrance. Professional caution, from a man accustomed to hiding. Zhao pressed a finger to her earpiece, listening to communications from her team inside. They're both in the building, heading to the suite now. She pulled out a tablet, and suddenly James was watching live surveillance footage from multiple angles inside Suite 2847. The room was elegantly appointed champagne chilling in an ice bucket, documents spread across the coffee table, the kind of setting designed for celebration. "Can you hear them?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zhao adjusted the audio feed. Suddenly, the car filled with Thalia's laughter, bright and uninhibited in a way James hadn't heard in years. "Did you see the news?" Thalia's voice crackled through the speakers. He lost $4 billion in one day. $4 billion, Silas. He's completely unraveling. Silas's reply was smooth, satisfied. Better than we planned. At this rate, he'll be worthless by the end of the week. James's jaw clenched so tightly he thought his teeth might crack. Zhao glanced at him. You ready for this? He nodded once, sharp and final. Then let's watch them hang themselves. The document Silas spread across the coffee table looked legitimate enough to fool anyone who wasn't looking for deception, which meant they were perfect for fooling federal investigators into making arrests. Transfer authorization for the final Singapore accounts, Silas said, sliding a page toward Thalia. Once you sign, we'll have clean access to the remaining $800 million. Combined with what we've already moved, that's $1.3 billion liquid and untraceable. Thalia picked up a pen, expensive and gold, the kind designed for signing things that mattered, but she hesitated, her manicured fingers hovering above the signature line. What about Jeffrey? The question hung in the air like a noose. In the sedan, James stopped breathing. Silas poured 2 glasses of champagne with practiced ease. What about him? The medications are taking too long. Thalia set the pen down, her voice carrying an edge of impatience that made James's blood turn to ice water. It's been 3 months. The doctors are starting to ask questions. That new attending physician requested a full toxicology panel yesterday. Did they run it? I delayed it. Claimed I wanted a second opinion from a specialist in Boston. Thalia accepted the champagne glass, swirling it absently. But we're running out of time. James might be financially distracted, but he's not stupid. Eventually he'll notice the pattern. Silas sat beside her, close enough that his hand rested on her knee. Then we accelerate. I have a contact who can provide something stronger, potassium chloride, administered through the IV. Mimics natural cardiac arrest perfectly, untraceable if done correctly. When? Thalia's voice was steady, clinical, discussing her son's murder with the same tone she used to order wine at restaurants. Tonight. Silas pulled a small vial from his jacket pocket, the liquid inside catching the lamplight. I'll have it delivered to you within the hour. You go to the hospital, do your usual late-night visit, administer it through the IV port. His heart stops within minutes. By the time the medical staff responds, it's too late. Thalia stared at the vial like it was a difficult business decision rather than infanticide. And the investigation? Tragic, genetic heart failure. They've already documented his cardiac irregularities for months. The narrative writes itself. Silas lifted his champagne glass in a mock toast. By tomorrow morning, you're a grieving widow with a trust fund to inherit. By next week, you file for divorce, citing James's neglect and emotional absence. By next month, you're $18 billion richer and free. Thalia touched her glass to his. To freedom, Silas echoed. In the sedan, Agent Zhao pressed a button on her tablet. That's conspiracy to commit murder. We've got everything we need. She spoke into her radio. All units, prepare to breach on my signal. But James was already moving, throwing open the car door and heading toward the hotel entrance with long, purposeful strides. Zhao shouted after him, but he didn't stop. Karina was right behind him, her face set with the same grim determination. They took the elevator to the 28th floor in silence that felt like the space between lightning and thunder. When the doors opened, James saw Zhao's team assembled in the hallway, 8 agents in tactical gear, waiting for the order. But James walked past them, straight to the suite door, and knocked. The sudden silence from inside was deafening. Silas opened the door, annoyance flashing across his face before recognition hit. His expression transformed from irritation to shock, to calculation in the span of a heartbeat. James. He recovered quickly, forcing a smile. This is unexpected. We were just... James's fist connected with Silas's jaw, with all the force of 18 years building empires and 8 years of failed fatherhood. The hedge fund manager went down hard, blood streaming from his split lip. Behind him, Thalia stood frozen, champagne glass still in hand, the vial of potassium chloride visible on the table beside the incriminating documents. Agent Zhao appeared in the doorway, her team flooding in behind her. Thalia Aldridge Keeling and Silas Thorne, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder of a minor, embezzlement, and wire fraud. Thalia's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, realization, fear, and finally, cold calculation. She looked at James with eyes that were already preparing her defense. You can't prove anything. Whatever you think you heard. We have 3 months of video evidence, Karina said, stepping forward with her laptop. Every visit, Every tampered for bag. Every moment you tortured your son while his father was building an empire you planned to steal. James walked past Silas's groaning form and stopped directly in front of his wife. Up close, she looked exactly as beautiful as the day he'd proposed. Polished, elegant, perfect in every superficial way. "I'm going to the hospital now," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made even the federal agents pause. "I'm going to sit beside my son and tell him that his mother is never coming back. And then I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure he knows what real love looks like." He turned and walked toward the door. "James!" Thalia's voice cracked, the composure finally fracturing. "You can't do this. My family, the Aldridges, will destroy you. You'll have nothing." James stopped at the threshold and looked back one final time. "I already have everything that matters." The handcuffs clicked around Thalia's wrists with a sound that seemed too small for the moment, a quiet metallic snap that ended an empire built on deception. She didn't struggle. That would have been beneath her. Instead, she stood perfectly still as Agent Zhao read her Miranda rights, her spine straight, chin elevated, every inch the Aldridge dynasty heiress who'd been trained from birth never to show weakness in public. But her eyes, those calculating eyes that had once captivated James across a charity gala, kept darting toward the door, toward escape routes that no longer existed. "You have the right to remain silent," Zhao continued, her voice professionally detached. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "I want my attorney," Thalia said, her voice regaining some of its aristocratic composure. "Gregory Ashford. Tell him Thalia Aldridge is calling. He'll know what to do." "Ashford won't take your call," James said, still standing in the doorway. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a saved email, and turned the screen toward her. "I contacted him 6 hours ago, sent him the evidence. He's already filed a motion to withdraw from representing you or anyone in the Aldridge family." Thalia's face went pale beneath her expertly applied makeup. "You're lying. Read it yourself." James handed the phone to Agent Zhao, who held it where Thalia could see. The email was brief and professionally devastating. "Mr. Keeling, after reviewing the materials you've provided, I must inform you that our firm can no longer represent Mrs. Keeling or the Aldridge Family Trust due to irreconcilable conflicts of interest. We will be cooperating fully with federal investigators." "Gregory's been our family attorney for 30 years, Thalia whispered, the first crack appearing in her perfect facade. "He wouldn't. He would, when faced with video evidence of conspiracy to murder a child." James's voice was surgically cold. Even lawyers have lines they won't cross. Silas was being hauled to his feet by 2 agents, his split lip still bleeding, his expensive suit rumpled and stained. He shot Thalia a look that contained no affection, no partnership, only the cold assessment of a man calculating how to minimize his own sentence. "I want to make a deal," Silas said immediately, addressing Agent Zhao. "I have information about other crimes, financial crimes, things that go beyond." "Shut up!" Thalia's composure finally shattered, her voice rising to something raw and desperate. "Don't you dare." "Other crimes?" James interrupted, his tone carrying a weight that made everyone in the room turn toward him. "You mean like what happened to David Reeves?" The name dropped into the room like a grenade. Thalia went absolutely still, her face transforming into something mask-like, careful. "David died in a car accident. Everyone knows that. David died when his brakes failed on Highway 41 at 11:47 p.m. on March 3rd, exactly 4 days after he told me he'd discovered irregularities in our Cayman accounts." James took a step forward, and for the first time, Thalia actually stepped back. "He was my business partner, my friend, the godfather to my son." He pulled out a folder from inside his jacket, thick with documents, heavy with evidence, and handed it to Agent Zhao. David's mechanic found traces of hydraulic line tampering during the post-accident investigation, but the police ruled it inconclusive. The mechanic kept his own records. When I contacted him yesterday, he was very willing to provide them to federal investigators. James's jaw tightened. The brake lines were professionally cut. Not enough to fail immediately, just enough to fail at high speed. Agent Zhao opened the folder, scanning the documents with increasing intensity. "Jesus Christ." "Tell them," James said, his eyes locked on Thalia's face. "Tell them about the mechanic you hired through Silas's connections. Tell them about the $200,000 wired from one of your shell accounts to an offshore number registered to a man with a very particular skill set." Thalia's lawyer-trained instincts finally kicked in. "I'm not saying anything without legal representation." "You don't have to," Karina said quietly, pulling up another file on her laptop. Because the mechanic you hired? He kept records too. Insurance policy, he called it. Bank statements, text message, screenshots, even a recorded phone conversation where you very explicitly told him which car to target and when. She turned the screen around. The recording played through the laptop speakers, Thalia's voice, unmistakable and cold. The silver Audi, Highway 41, late evening. Make it look like brake failure. Can you do that? A male voice responded. For the price you're offering? Consider it done. The room went silent except for the audio playback. When it ended, even Silas looked at Thalia with something approaching horror. David was going to expose the embezzlement, James said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of a death sentence. So you had him killed. You murdered my best friend, made his wife a widow, made his children fatherless, all to protect a scheme to steal money and murder our son. Agent Zhao closed the folder with deliberate care. Thalia Aldridge Keeling. I'm adding charges of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder in the death of David Reeves. Thalia's legs seemed to give out. She sagged between the two agents, holding her arms, no longer the poised socialite but something smaller, diminished, finally showing the rot beneath the polished surface. The Aldridge name won't save you, James said, turning toward the door one final time. Your family's attorneys won't save you. Your connections won't save you. You're going to spend the rest of your life in a cell. And Jeffrey will grow up knowing his mother chose greed over his life. He walked out without looking back. Behind him, he heard Thalia scream his name, heard the sophisticated mask finally crack completely into something desperate and animal. But he didn't stop. He had a son to get back to. 18 months later, a man named Michael Brooks sat on a weathered beach blanket in Cape Sanctuary, Maine, watching a boy chase seagulls across the sand with the kind of unbridled joy that comes from a body finally free of poison. The boy had just turned 9.5 years old. His name was Jeremy now, not Jeffrey Keeling, heir to a dismantled empire, but Jeremy Brooks, son of a freelance software consultant and a pediatric nurse who ran a small clinic in town. The name change had been Karina's idea, part of the comprehensive disappearance Marcus Chen had orchestrated through legal channels that existed in gray spaces most people never knew about. He's gotten faster, Karina said, settling onto the blanket beside him. She wore a simple linen dress and no makeup, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked nothing like the woman who'd stood in a hospital corridor and changed the trajectory of 3 lives, with 2 words: stay silent. He's healthy, Michael James replied, still unable to fully accept the miracle of that simple statement. His last cardiology appointment showed completely normal heart function. Doctor, Patterson said if he didn't know Jeremy's history, he'd never suspect any cardiac issues. The boy Jeremy found a particularly interesting shell and came running back, his feet kicking up sprays of sand. His cheeks were flushed pink with exertion and sea air, his eyes bright with the kind of simple happiness that had seemed impossible in those sterile hospital corridors. Dad, look! He thrust the shell forward, a perfect spiral of white and coral. It's a whelk shell, Mrs. Patterson from the Marine Center said. These are really rare on this beach. It's beautiful, buddy. James took the shell, turning it over in his hands with genuine appreciation. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have known a whelk from a clam. Now he could identify 17 different types of shells, knew the tide schedules by heart, and understood that being present for these small discoveries mattered more than any billion-dollar acquisition. Can we go tide pooling later? Before dinner? Jeremy bounced on his toes, energy radiating from him in waves that would have been medically concerning 18 months ago. Absolutely. But first, James pulled out a bottle of sunscreen from their beach bag. Let's make sure you're protected. Don't want you getting burned. Jeremy groaned but submitted to the application with the resigned patience of a child who'd spent too much time in hospitals to argue about health precautions. As James smoothed sunscreen across his son's shoulders, he marveled at how different this felt from those rare moments of physical contact in their old life. Hurried hugs before business trips, distracted hair ruffles while reading acquisition reports. This was present. This was real. All set. James patted Jeremy's back. Go find more treasures. We've got an hour before tide comes in. Jeremy took off running again, whooping as he leaped over a piece of driftwood, and James watched him with an intensity that would have seemed excessive to anyone who hadn't almost lost a child to calculated murder. Karina reached over and took his hand, their fingers interlacing with the comfortable familiarity of 2 people who'd survived war together. They hadn't planned on this, on becoming a family, on building something real from the wreckage of betrayal and conspiracy. But somewhere between federal trials and witness protection protocols, Between sleepless nights when Jeffrey had nightmares about his mother and quiet mornings when he woke up healthy for the first time in months, it had happened. The adoption had been finalized 4 months ago, making Jeremy legally theirs, Michael and Karina Brooks. A family built, not on contracts and alliances, but on sacrifice and choice. "Do you miss it?" Karina asked, her eyes on the horizon where seagulls wheeled against the afternoon sun. The empire, the power, being James Keeling. James considered the question seriously, because Karina deserved honest answers. He thought about the corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows, the private jets, the board meetings where his word could make or break billion-dollar companies. He thought about the weight of that life, the constant pressure, the belief that accumulation equaled success. Then he looked at Jeremy, his son, their son splashing through shallow pools, laughing at something only he could see. "Not even once," James said. The offshore trust Marcus had established sat untouched, growing quietly through conservative investments, waiting for Jeremy when he turned 25. $3 billion, enough to ensure security without the corruption that came from too much too young. The rest, every dollar of the empire James Keeling had built, had been liquidated, donated to children's hospitals and domestic abuse prevention programs. A fortune turned toward protecting the vulnerable. The media had called it the most spectacular fall in financial history. Think pieces were still being written about James Keeling's collapse, his public breakdown, his mysterious disappearance after the trial. Some speculated he'd fled the country. Others suggested he'd taken his own life from shame. Only a handful of people knew the truth. He'd simply chosen to live. "Jeremy's teacher called yesterday," Karina said, breaking the comfortable silence. "She wants to know if we'd like him to participate in the school's marine biology program. It's a year-long commitment, lots of field work." "What did you tell her?" "That I'd talk to his father." Karina smiled, squeezing his hand. "That we make decisions together now." James pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Tell her yes, whatever makes him happy." Jeremy came running back one more time, breathless and glowing, carrying a bucket full of treasures, shells and sea glass and smooth stones polished by endless tides. He dumped them onto the blanket with pride, pointing out each discovery with scientific precision he'd learned from library books and genuine curiosity. "This one's my favorite," Jeremy said, holding up a piece of blue sea glass that caught the light. "Mom, can we put it in the window at home? Where the sun hits it in the morning?" "Of course, sweetheart." Karina pulled Jeremy into a hug, and the boy went willingly, still holding his treasured glass. Over Jeremy's head, Karina and James exchanged a look, one of those silent conversations that couples who've survived impossible things learn to have without words. "Are we safe? We're alive. Is this enough? This is everything." The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. In the distance, the Cape Sanctuary lighthouse began its rhythmic rotation, guiding ships safely home. Michael Brooks gathered his family, his real family, built not on contracts and alliances but on sacrifice and choice, and headed back toward their small house, 3 blocks from the beach. Behind them, the tide came in, washing away footprints and leaving the sand clean and new, ready for tomorrow. If this story reached into your chest and grabbed your heart, I need you to do something for me right now. Not tomorrow, not later tonight. Right now. Look at that subscribe button below this video. That small click connects us across continents, across time zones, across every barrier that tries to keep stories like this from reaching the people who need them most. When you subscribe, you're telling me that stories about redemption matter, that second chances matter, that choosing love over legacy matters. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had to choose between success and what truly matters? Or maybe you've witnessed someone make that choice. Share your story below, because your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today, to find the courage to change their own life. And here's what I want you to really hear. If you're watching this while your child sleeps in the next room, or while you're taking a break from work you hate, or while you're wondering if the empire you're building is worth the family you're losing, this is your sign. Jeffrey got his father back. Your loved ones are waiting for you too. Hit that like button if you believe people can change. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to choose differently. I'll see you in the next story, where we'll dive into another world that'll make you feel everything. Until then, remember, the most valuable thing you can spend is time. You can always make more money. You can't make more moments. Now go hug someone you love.